In April of 2015, a cargo plane landed on a frozen Alaskan river. The doors opened, and one by one, 130 wood bison, the largest land animal in North America, stepped out onto American soil, the first time these massive creatures had walked the wild of the United States in over 100 years.
It's a grand opportunity for restoration of a missing piece of our incredible landscape.
The biologists on the riverbank had spent 23 years getting them there. They'd also been told in writing by federal agencies and outside scientists that the herd would probably fail. The land had been without these animals since the 1800s. The reasons they vanished, nobody fully understood. The reasons they'd survive coming back, even less.
We have to manage the numbers just to ensure that the landscape and ecosystem remains healthy. So these transfers and rematuration projects, they help mimic that reduction in numbers.
11 years later, the project is doing something nobody at that release on April 3rd, 2015 would have written down on paper. The land is changing. The animals are still there. And just months ago, a second cargo plane landed somewhere else in Alaska, with 17 more of them on board. The answer is that they almost didn't. But there's one winner inside this story that almost ended everything. We'll get there. So here's the question those biologists couldn't answer in 2015, and most of them still can't answer today. What killed every single wood bison in Alaska in the first place? Because if you don't know what wiped them out, you don't know if it's still out there waiting to wipe them out again. And that question hung over the entire release. The honest answer is, the trail goes cold. We have detailed records of how American buffalo were slaughtered on the Great Plains, down to the year, the railroad, and the rifle. With wood bison in Alaska, there's almost nothing. Some researchers point to a string of unusually harsh winters in the late 1700s and early 1800s that may have crashed vulnerable populations. Others point to the spread of repeating rifles into the interior and along the Yukon. Most likely, it was both. A bad climate window opened the door, and the new guns walked through it. By the late 1800s, the wood bison of Alaska were silent, then gone. Nobody on the riverbanks at the time wrote down what they were losing, including the Athabascan peoples who had hunted alongside these herds for thousands of years. That's the first answer the biologists in 2015 had to make peace with. They could not prove the reason was over. They could only release the bison and watch. But here's where it gets stranger. By the early 1900s, wood bison were believed to be extinct on the entire continent. Not endangered, extinct. Until a single surviving herd was rediscovered in 1957 in remote northern Alberta by accident. From the descendants of that one surprise herd in Wood Buffalo National Park, every wild wood bison alive on Earth today eventually traces. That includes the 130 animals that stepped off the cargo plane near Shagaluk, animals bred at the Alaska Wildlife Conservation Center from disease-free genetics sourced from Elk Island National Park in Canada. So the Alaska release was not just bringing back a missing animal. It was bringing back an animal the world had written off completely, until a forgotten corner of Canada quietly proved the obituary wrong. Which raises the question the biologists really lost sleep over. If wood bison had survived in Alaska for tens of thousands of years and then vanished inside 1 century, what made anyone think 130 zoo-bred animals could succeed where the originals had failed? The answer is that they almost didn't. Alaska's Wood Bison Restoration Project began in 1992. By the time those animals stepped off the cargo plane in 2015, it had taken 23 years of bureaucratic fighting. Permits, agency disputes, federal listings, one near-fatal political snag after another. The bison themselves were already bred and waiting in pens at the Alaska Wildlife Conservation Center by 2008. They sat there for another 7 years while the lawyers fought. The reason was always the same thing. Wood bison were federally listed as threatened. The moment you released a threatened species onto mixed-use land, declared a Section 10J non-essential experimental population under the Endangered Species Act, every oil and gas project, every timber lease, and every road permit on that land suddenly fell under federal review. The native corporation Doyon Limited, the largest private landowner in Alaska, opposed one of the early sites entirely. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service flip-flopped on Yukon Flats. The project nearly died 3 separate times. Then somebody opened a map. They found a quiet stretch of country west of the Yukon River that didn't have most of those problems. No oil leases, no fence lines, wide open sedge flats running for miles. And critically, 3 villages there, Anvik, Shagaluk, and Holy Cross, actually wanted the bison back. The biologist running it on the ground was about to find out whether 23 years of fighting had been worth it. His name was Tom Seaton, a DF&G wildlife pilot, the kind of biologist who flies his own small plane over wood bison, surveys himself. He'd been working on the project for years. On April 3, 2015, he and his team began moving wood bison out onto the Inoko Flats in stages. The original plan called for 100 animals. Donations from conservation partners let them release 130. What happened next, nobody on the team had expected to happen this fast. The bison converted to a wild diet of sedge and grass within days, not weeks, days. The keepers had braced for animals that wouldn't know how to feed in the wild, animals bred for 3 generations behind fences. Instead, the bison walked off the trucks and began grazing the same way their ancestors had 100 years earlier on the same flats, in country none of them had ever seen. By summer, 16 calves had been born wild on the Inoko, the first wild-born wood bison on American soil since sometime before 1900. For 7 years, the project actually worked. And then one winter came along that nobody at ADF&G had records for. The winter of 2022 and 23 started early. It got worse than anyone tracking it had data for. Seaton, on the record, called it the harshest late winter conditions in a century according to ADF&G records. Snow fell on top of snow, then froze, then snowed again, then froze again. The freeze layers built up inside the snowpack like sheets of glass. The wind packed it hard on top. By February, the bison couldn't dig down to the sedge and grass underneath. They could feel it, they could smell it, they couldn't reach it, and they weren't the only ones. That same winter, moose populations in parts of interior Alaska dropped 30 to 40%. Some Dall sheep herds lost 3/4 of their animals. Plains bison crashed at Delta Junction. Everything that needed to dig for food and couldn't migrate out was in trouble. The wood bison just happened to be the most visible story because they were the most publicized success. When the snow finally cleared and ADF&G did the spring count, the Inoko herd had collapsed from 150 animals down to 72. Nearly half the herd gone in one season. That should have been the end of the project. It wasn't. And the reason came down to one sentence Seaton put on the record that summer. He said this was natural selection doing its work. The survivors of a winter like that were not random survivors. They were the bison whose mothers had taught them where to find wind-scraped ridges, which slopes melted out earliest, and how deep to push when the snow got too thick. Those were the animals feeding the next generation of calves. The next generation, he said, would be tougher than the founders had been. He turned out to be right. But while he was making his case in the field, a much louder argument had already started back in Fairbanks. Doyen Limited went on the record opposing further wood bison releases. Their spokesperson, Cheyenne Kuplak, made the case in plain language. The Yukon River salmon runs are collapsing, with chum returns falling below 250,000 fish and 6 consecutive years of fishing closures affecting Athabascan communities. Subsistence fishing villages are watching their freezers go empty. Doyen's position was direct. Before Alaska expands a wood bison program, the state should fully address the salmon crisis that has actual consequences for actual communities right now. This is the part of the story most rewilding documentaries skip, because the honest version is, Doyen is not wrong about the salmon. The Chinook and chum runs on the Yukon are in genuine crisis. Subsistence closures have been catastrophic for villages that have lived on salmon for thousands of years. If the state has limited capacity to do conservation work, the question of which crisis to fight first is a real question, not a stupid one. The counter is that the wood bison program and the salmon program are run by different agencies with different funding sources, and one does not steal staff or money from the other. Restoring an extinct land mammal and restoring a collapsing fish run are not direct competitors for the same dollars. They look like competitors only when you're standing on the political surface. The bison stayed. The argument didn't stop. And then ADF&G made a move that surprised even some of the people working inside the project. In August of 2025, a second cargo plane took off. This time, the destination was the Minto Flats State Game Refuge, deep in interior Alaska, hours from any village. 17 wood bison on board, not from Canada this time, from the Alaska Wildlife Conservation Center's own breeding herd. Animals descended from the founders that had already proven they could survive the country. 17 is a small number. The minimum for long-term genetic health in a wildwood bison herd is somewhere between 400 and 500 animals. The Inoko herd is sitting at around 80. Minto Flats is starting from 17. The work in front of these animals is, in honest terms, the work of 2 more generations of biologists. Most of the people standing on the runway in August 2025 will not be alive to see the moment that population crosses 500. That's the part of this story that doesn't fit into a headline. When you bring an extinct land-shaping animal back to country that hasn't held one in over a century, you're not restoring a population. You're starting a clock that runs longer than your career. The original Alaska wood bison vanished inside 1 century. Putting them back is going to take at least 2. So here's where I'll leave you with it. If the bison that walked off that cargo plane near Shagaluk in 2015 are now into their grandchildren's generation, and we're only just past the beginning, what does that mean for every other species we've already lost from the landscapes we live on? Are we ready to start clocks that finish long after we do? Tell me where you land.